This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, where every bean tells a story of adventure and passion. Nestled in the heart of Idaho's mountain wilderness, White Cloud has been mastering the craft of coffee for more than 38 years, bringing the spirit of the outdoors into every cup. Discover the difference in their premium beans, meticulously roasted to capture the essence of the mountains. From robust, full-bodied classics to creative flavored blends, White Cloud coffees are designed for you to appreciate the subtleties of premium coffee. Now, listeners of our podcast can get an exclusive 10% discount. Just use the promo code CREATIVITY at checkout. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY for your 10% discount. Start your adventure today. Journey to whitecloudcoffee.com. Tap into your most original thinking. Organize your ideas and create the opportunities to launch your creative work. Unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity. And today we're continuing our conversation with creative practitioners, not only about how they get inspired, but how we organize ideas and how we ultimately gain the confidence and the connections to launch our work out into the world. And an important theme of this episode is going to be the exploration of potential repercussions of emerging technologies and the whole importance of designing a sustainable future. And my guests are Scott Doorley and Armando Veve. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
And Scott is a co-author along with Carissa Carter, and Armando is the illustrator of a terrific new book called Assembling Tomorrow, a guide to designing a thriving future. It's just out from 10 Speed Press. Scott, as a writer, designer, creative director for Stanford D School, I observed this book was a design effort. It was not just written and published. Tell us about the concept of how the book came together.
Yeah, there's so many steps along the way and so many people who contributed, because like these types of things are so much a group effort, and you think of us as the authors, but it's really not that. There's Armando, two designers at 10 Speed Press, and 10 Speed Press just puts out these beautiful books. So Annie Marino and Kelly Booth. And that's step number one, is it's a group effort. The idea though behind the book is that we just felt like we're in some kind of era, and this was back in 2018. It just felt like things were all going haywire at once. And you've got climate change, you've got the political unrest, you've got all this emerging technology coming. And we just wanted to take some time to figure out what's design's role in creating a future when all that's happening, when everything's shifting, when we can't really predict things, when everything feels like it's coming undone. What's the role of design? How should it change? And that's where we began the book. And immediately we wanted to make sure that we had some fiction in it, so we could not just talk about what is, but talk about what could be. And then we can get into how we met Armando, which was lucky for us.
For sure. These inserts of, you say the fiction, but yes, essays on the various topics. They're not only, I guess, milestones in the book, but also visually. Different color paper, different fonts. Armando's illustrations begin to really come alive. What was the idea behind the staccato breaking up of the story with these essays?
Yeah, I will say the main thing that we noticed early on, we've been publishing a bunch of books at the D School, and most of the other books we've been publishing, with the exception of one, are very short. And that was on purpose. We wanted it to be like, you could read it on an airplane, you could read it in 2 nights, read half before you fall asleep. This is much longer. I did a little bit of research. It's actually hard to find the data, but there's an online ebook reader that's not Nook or Kindle that does take data, and they published a paper about how often people actually finish a nonfiction book. And it depends on the book, but it's anywhere from sort of 7 to 40%. So 40% is good,
Is your count.
right? Yeah. So what we wanted to do was find a way that you could read it in chunks. So you can read a bit of a chapter and feel like you've gotten something from that. You can read a story and feel like you've gotten something from that. So you can read it all the way through and you can see how everything adds up. But you can also read for between 10 minutes to a half an hour and really get something out of it.
Yes. Armando, as Scott mentioned, your contribution, you can tell as soon as you hold the book that the illustration was not an afterthought. They didn't just
Mm.
send you the manuscript and say, "Could you add some spice here?" You were obviously intimately involved. How were you gathering the concepts and the points and really say, "How do I bring this to life?"
Sure. And I was reflecting on kind of my role in this project, and I realized I was there from the beginning. When they first reached out to me, there was actually no manuscript, or it was very much in progress. But they said that they were thinking about a project tentatively titled The History of the Future of Design, which blended fiction and history and essays. And already my mind was racing. And when I did finally get a copy of the manuscript, I found myself just turning pages thinking everyone needs to read this. And on a visual level, there was just so much to work with. The concepts were challenging and abstract. And I just felt like it was worth diving into on a deeper level. And that's really where I started. I started chapter by chapter and created brain dumps and mind maps, pulling nouns and objects and ideas that immediately captured my attention. And from there, tried to start weaving relationships between them.
And when I read your background, an award-winning illustrator and Pew Fellow, your drawings have appeared in the New Yorker, National Geographic, Scientific American, Wired. I went back and looked at some of these, and it's a blend of there are the how-to schematic kind of illustrations, but some of the ones here are much more conceptual, much more abstract. As you mentioned, relationships, and you're trying to illustrate the point, not the how-to in this case. How was
Yeah,
that interpretation for you? And did you have to check in with Scott and Carissa and say, "Is this the point you were making?"
there were a lot of check-ins, definitely. And I always looked forward to our conversations. We met via Zoom pretty regularly, and they just became these really inspired conversations that just went on and on. We spoke about the craziest things, but these kind of automatic thinking sessions led to some of the imagery that you see in the book. And I over time developed a trust with them. And I think that allowed me to be very honest with certain ideas. So I would share things in a very skeletal state. And there were some times where I would draw live on a Zoom session and we would develop an idea together, and seeing their response to certain images gave me something concrete to hold on to. And I ran with that. And
Mhm.
often humor was something that we gravitated towards.
Yes. You had to smile every now and then, Scott, as a reader. I think I was 3 chapters into this, and I said, I need an answer because the questions come quickly. Is it gonna be great? Is it gonna be dangerous? Are we facing this? Are we facing that? And I said,
Yeah.
"We gotta land this plane."
Mhm.
How did you, I'll say, balance the need to provoke the questions while also saying, "We've gotta provide a guide. We've gotta answer some tough questions."
Yeah, we mixed it up a little bit. So I would say the fiction stories probably ask more questions than they answer a little bit.
Mhm.
And then in the nonfiction, what we try to do with the nonfiction is, and this is why it was called A History of the Future of Design initially, is we're trying to look to the history and see what has happened that we can learn from. And we give a bunch of stories about design going wrong in the past or going well in the past. And then we try to dig into is there a lesson that we can learn from there? So the hope is that there are questions and lessons. I don't know if we quite get to a perfect answer, right? Because
Mm.
our feeling is that things are always changing, they always have been. And really trying to get it right is not the goal. Trying to be in a position where you can respond, and when things go off kilter, you can deal with them and react. That's more where we landed once we got to the end. But to be honest, at the beginning, we didn't know. We were just like, we have to grapple with this. That was the impetus
Mhm.
for the book.
Right. It really shows this limitless potential vis-a-vis perilous potential. It really does provoke those thoughts. Elaborate a little bit on what has implications for the capital D designers, the creators of this next world?
Yeah, there are definitely a few things. One I just mentioned, which is this idea that we in the last chapter, we call it aiming for imperfection. And that sounds a little weird that your goal would be to not get something right, to not be perfect. But what we're trying to point out there is we are in an era of just constant change, and we're in an era of unpredictability. So I know a lot of people who are working with generative AI, and they struggle working with it because what they get back from it is not what they expect. It's, I don't know what's coming. I don't know how to deal with this. It's very unpredictable. And we're getting into synthetic biology now too, where we're literally speeding up evolution. And that's what's that going to do? That's also going to be unpredictable. So in an unpredictable world, how do you create? And our feeling is that the goal should not be to like ship something perfect and have it go out into the world and it's a big hit, but to create something that's changeable after you make it. So you're not letting loose, you're not letting go, you're shepherding rather than shipping, if that makes sense.
Interesting. It does bring to mind. So sometimes I read about these things, generative AI, synthetic biology that we've been talking about. And I think, what was it like when we were shifting from whale oil to petroleum? What was the resistance to the phonograph? I like live music at a quartet in my living room. I don't want to listen to a recording. Oh my gosh. And the pitfalls of rock and roll. All of these things, you look back and you go, really, was it that big a deal? The light bulb, street lamps. And yet, those were also seismic social shifts, weren't they?
Yeah, no, you're out in Boise and you guys have dark skies, right? Like there's almost nowhere I can go in Silicon Valley where I can see more than a handful of stars. And of course, I love having lights at night. So I don't want to not have that. There are things lost as we go ahead. I do think there's a little bit of overzealous fear at any given moment. And we are definitely in one of those moments again at the dawn of electricity or the industrial era or even the information age. We're at a different moment now. But I do think there's some flavor of this moment that's a little bit different because the technology is just, they're a little more unwieldy and they shift the relationships between people and things. Generative AI, it behaves a lot like people, right? It does thinking and it's creative and it makes decisions. Synthetic biology makes nature almost a technology, right? You can program nature. So that's like a big shift. And I don't think we know exactly what's coming, but I think that's the point is we don't know what's coming. So let's not fill in the blanks with a utopia or a dystopia. Let's just try and figure out where we move from here and what's good about it and what's not, and what we need to do to be able to handle it. And it's coming. We just got to figure out what to do.
And that's something I had to balance in the drawings was a tone that was either dystopic or whimsical. How that came across, I feel like it was easy to lean towards something that was too dystopic, things falling apart, things breaking. But it was important to reintroduce a sense of healing, harmony, balance. And oftentimes that was also done through a whimsical approach.
Yes. I think that's an example I was going to ask you about, Armando, of the influence of the designer, the illustrator, on all these concepts of social media, artificial intelligence, climate change, all of these things that could be this weighty, almost editorial story if you weren't careful. You were simply trying to illustrate the concept, not necessarily the pro or the con. Would I be right in that?
Yeah. When I was illustrating this book, I was very conscious of creating images that were augmenting what was said in the text versus literalizing. And at one point, I created a bunch of graphs that were communicating specific concepts. And there was a shift that happened where we decided to scrap those graphs, which were literally Venn diagrams and other kind of infographics, and instead lean more towards a more narrative and imaginative direction. And so all of these spot illustrations, full pages and double page spreads for me started to tell a parallel narrative that existed with alongside the text. And the illustrations here entertain and help you go through the book, but also allow you to see some of the concepts being played out, being deconstructed, being presented in new and unfamiliar ways.
Hmm. I'm glad you bring up the idea, of illustrating the metaphors and things. I was looking at the chapter on shape-shifting actionables to unmake runaway design. And this idea that you drew from Einstein's dreams, that was the idea of using metaphor to think about the what if implications. It says, if your new blank, insert your brilliant idea here, function like a river, how would it work? What would it be the main parts of the flow? What would be the eddies? What is the swirl? And then it says, if you're insert your brilliant idea here, function like a relationship, how would it work? All these things must have helped you draw out the idea. And I think of both the verbal and the visual story or metaphor.
And they both work together. I think that's an important aspect of illustration, is that alone it can mean so many things, but once it's paired with the text, that's when it really starts to create meaning and deliver those messages.
I love this idea, Mark, of drawing out. I think that's there's something I want to say about working with Armando, which I think is useful to anyone who's thinking about a creative partnership, which is that I feel like the give and take was so good. Armando's was really drawing out the ideas from us, literally by drawing them, but also in our conversation, we were talking about, should an image have a caption or not? What should the page color be? Which was really Armando was nailing to work with the illustrations. But also, like, he was giving us feedback on the stories. He was giving us like ideas about titles. Like it was a very fluid thing where we're trying to tune both the content and the drawings. It wasn't, oh, this is the content, you better just draw X. It was like, here's what we're thinking. And Armando would come back and say, what about this? And we're like, yeah, like that. And then we would adjust a little bit to meet the drawing rather than have the drawing meet the content too.
So good.
And I think it's very rare in past book projects. Usually author and illustrator are kept in different cages. And here we're in it together. And I think it's because we trusted each other and we had similar tastes in terms of visual solutions. I think also you love detail. I think with my work, which is so rooted in those minor details, if those are not of value, it can be difficult to have those conversations, because we were talking about background characters, we were talking about subterranean elements, and oftentimes I'm told to simplify, but you were all really into this idea of just pushing it further. And that's why I think I remained enthusiastic and excited to keep working on this.
I love the behind the scenes here. And maybe to continue that thought, Scott, it brings to mind one of your previous books, Make Space, How to Set the Stage for Creative Collaboration. And I think about both real and virtual space. How did you and Carissa and Armando come to make space for your collaboration?
Oh, that's good. You mean in the behind the scenes
Yeah,
collaborative?
literally, how are we making this happen?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is we fell in love with Armando's work. So we saw an illustration in the New Yorker that was, I think it was in an article by Elizabeth Colbert that was about insects vanishing. And so we just immediately fell in love with his work. And I think we fell in love with, when I'm hearing Armando talk, we fell in love with the things that he cares about too, right? Like the reason we fell in love with it, because we loved the amount of detail. We loved like the combination between the whimsical and the specific, and it being so technically sound but so imaginative. So I think like one is just like really the right partnership is what I'm getting at. Do you believe and care about the same things? Because a lot of creative, I'm a creative director at the Stanford D School, so I'm constantly collaborating and leading creative projects. And a lot of times where you get into trouble is the mental model of what matters is different. Like one person might be like, oh, I'm really into the details. And somebody else is, oh, I just want to get 100. I want to get as many out as we can. And neither is bad. It's just, you have to be on the same page, not to have a bad metaphor, but you want it. And I think we just immediately were like, yeah, we want to work with Armando because of what Armando does. So it made it easy to be like, yeah, we're excited about what you're excited about. And then we figured that out pretty quickly. Yeah. Armando, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was also going to say that I think the fact that my works are made by hand was a really important element here, especially because the content was so fueled by technological complications and forward thinking. This idea of having a voice that goes through the book that's human made and has that human touch and human imperfection, it was really important. And I think that tension comes through in the book.
Looking forward then to the readers of the book who are in a position now to shape and design and create that future that you've written the guide for. What is it about the word thriving that should inspire the reader? That we're not just creating the new technology or the next thing, but we want to create a thriving future. Scott, where do we take that word?
Yeah, so that's in the subtitle, and we actually struggled with both the subtitle and the title, as Armando knows. We had a lot of back and forth on that too. And the thriving for us, it's, you could say like toward a better future, but when you say better, it's a very loaded word, actually. It's like very unclear what that means, and also whose better future kind of comes up a lot. Thriving feels a lot more dynamic, and I think that's where our brains landed is this is not about just endless growth. It's not about getting better. It's not about total improvement. It's about everybody kind of realizing who they are. It's about everybody getting the most out of life. It's about us using the technology in ways that are going to be useful to us and useful to the planet. It's really thriving just felt like the right word because it's about harmony and it's about interactions and it's about continuation. It's not about nailing it, getting it right, doing it right, making it better.
And Armando, right from the cover illustration, this idea of thriving is communicated. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think with the use of the gold foil, you get this idea of this brilliant thing. We wanted it to feel organic and mechanical at the same time. So you get that sense of cross-pollination, the different world represented in the book. And to be honest, this approach, this line-based approach was completely new for me. And I'm thrilled with how it turned out. I think it looks beautiful. It's really striking.
It is a nice combination. It has a technology feel, but as you say, it's nature and right down to the detail of the insect climbing up the stem.
Yeah, and you get the sense that it's coming together, that it's not breaking apart. It's coming together. There's a sense of community, of light.
Oh, fantastic. I can't thank you both enough for being on the show. What a great conversation about creativity in general, but also the collaboration creativity that it took to make the book. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so
Mark.
much.
Yeah, and I'll put a link in for where you can buy the book and find the book. It's Assembling Tomorrow, a guide to designing a thriving future. It's just out from 10 Speed Press. And I want to thank Karen Engler for her support in arranging this interview. And of course, our sponsor, White Cloud Coffee Roasters. As you've probably noticed, I'm in the coffee shop now at Eagle Coffee and Bakery, and we serve White Cloud Coffee, and you can get 10% off your order when you go to their website, whitecloudcoffee.com, and use the code CREATIVITY at checkout. My guests have been Scott Doorley and Armando Veve, and of course, absent your other co-author, Carissa Carter. We want to thank you all for contributing the book, of course, but also being on the show. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And listeners, come back again next time. We're going to continue our around the world journeys to talk to creative practitioners everywhere about how we get inspired for new ideas, then how we organize ideas, and then how we gain the confidence and the connections to launch our work out into the world. Until next time, I'm Mark Stinson, and we'll keep unlocking your world of creativity. Bye for now.
Unlocking Your World of Creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This program was produced by BSB Media, creators of IntelliKey Leadership Stories, Unlocking Your World of Creativity, and thepeaceroom.love. Are you an author who's tired of the long waits and low royalties? Exact Rush is here to change the game. We specialize in publishing with precision, and we get your book to market in just 3 to 6 months, not years. But we're not just about books. We also support your photography, web design, and content creation needs. Our focus ranges from spirituality to pop culture, and we're excited about our diverse lineup of upcoming releases. So, if you're ready to keep more of your hard-earned money and get published faster, ExactRush is your ticket. Visit exactrush.com and turn your creative dream into a profitable reality today.